Hello everyone, thank you for coming by. It's good to see you. I'm going to be trying out a new style of video today. I want to take a look back on the wonderful games I was able to play over the last year and share some of my thoughts on each one. I was inspired by a video from the channel Daryl Talks Games, recapping the results of the challenge he set for himself to finish his gaming backlog over the course of the year. After making a video about this challenge last year, he released a follow-up video where he takes the viewers through the gaming journey he went on over the course of that year, highlighting which games he enjoyed and discussing the ones he didn't as much. Now, me personally, I was not able to finish my backlog this year, as much as I wish I could say I did, but the idea of a comprehensive video following the year-long gaming journey was really inspiring to me. Daryl's video, which I highly recommend watching by the way, focuses more on the idea of the video game backlog itself, and less so on fully articulating his thoughts on each game, but I was still inspired nonetheless. There's a quote from the video where he says that the process of writing about the games that you finish helps you remember what made them so special to you, and it helps to preserve the memories. I want to create my own version of that process, and rather than just write about it, I thought I could share it with fellow viewers who might be interested, just like I was so interested in Daryl's gaming journey. 2023 was a particularly great year for games, not just for games released this year, but also the older games I finally got around to playing. I think this exciting year for me will make for an equally exciting video, so I hope all of you enjoy it. With that being said, let's begin the tale of my gaming journey in 2023. We begin the year with Nier Replicant, which is a very interesting game to begin with. I played and adored Nier Automata over the pandemic, so after getting Replicant as a Christmas gift, I was very excited to jump into the game that preceded Automata, especially considering it had gotten a remaster only a couple years ago. And, well, my thoughts on this game are very complicated. In many ways, the game has all the pieces of what made Automata so great. The trippy story, memorable characters, fun action combat, but I find Replicant lacking in many ways still. The game features a lot of repetition, as there is no fast travel for most of the game, so you'll be doing a lot of walking in the same areas. You're also required to play through the second half of the game 3 times in order to see all 4 unique endings, alongside replaying the first hour of the game to see the new ending that was added in the remaster. This wore me down fast. I was hooked by the story, which is one of the game's strongest aspects, but I was already getting a bit bored by the time I hit playthrough number 2. Now, despite the fact that I've already been focusing on negatives, the game is still largely enjoyable. I just wish some of the repetition would have been cut out of the remastered version. I'll take the time to say this now. There's a lot of games I criticize in this video, but I mean it when I say that I truly enjoyed every game I played this year. I wouldn't have played it if I didn't. I just think it's more interesting to talk about the critiques than just praise sometimes. So if I say a lot of negative stuff about one of your favorite games, odds are I still really liked it. I spent the rest of January playing Persona 5 on my Switch, which is a game I've already beaten 3 times already, so there's not much new to say about it. I'm pretty sure everyone knows how much I love this game. The Switch version runs great though. It was super great to have Persona 5 finally available on a handheld. That's all I'll say about that though. On to the next one. I love this game. I loved this game before it got a remaster, but now that it's been remastered, I just love it even more. I rarely ever impulse buy games. I tend to be pretty cautious about what kind of games I buy, but I bought this game the second it became available after the Nintendo Direct was announced. I was so excited. Look, I'm assuming everyone already knows about this game, so I don't think I need to explain how it's a shining example of how to do a Metroidvania in 3D. I want to gush about these graphics for a second though, because I don't think enough people are talking about how this is by far the best looking game on Switch. Like, I really don't know how Retro Studios made this game look so good. The new controls make a big difference as well, as I thought the tank controls in the original were a poor fit. I always preferred to play with the version that had the Wii pointer controls. Now, with a full twin stick support alongside the improved graphics, I feel like this game has finally reached its full potential. I hope many people who never played this game before got to experience it for the first time on Switch, because it is truly one of my favorites of all time. I played a lot of Genshin Impact in February as well, but since it's not a game I technically beat this year, I won't get into it. I certainly have a lot of thoughts about both Genshin and the new content from the past year, but it would probably take too long to get into that. So let's just move on to March instead. This was another game I played a lot in February, but I wasn't able to finish it until March. I've turned into quite a big Fire Emblem fan in the past 5 years, and I've gotten the last 2 major releases at launch. Three Houses was, and probably still is, my favorite Fire Emblem game, but the branching story and suggested multiple playthroughs made the game a bit exhausting to see through to the end. So I was very happy to see Engage return the series to a singular narrative. I ended up enjoying Engage a lot, probably a bit more than I thought I would. The gameplay of Engage is probably the best the series has ever seen, as I found the ring mechanic to be interesting and fun. The story is way more simple than the story of Three Houses was, but I still found it very interesting and it took some turns that I was not expecting. Engage's biggest flaw is that a majority of the units are pretty forgettable, and grinding points for support conversation is nowhere near as easy as it was in Three Houses. A lack of a New Game Plus mode made me give up on the game sooner than I was hoping to. I'm surprised it never got added. But the fun gameplay, colorful art style, and the cute activities you can do between battle make Engage a close competitor for my favorite Fire Emblem game of all time. I hadn't heard of this game before receiving it as a birthday gift from a friend this year, but I was very impressed by what he found because it seemed like something that matched my gaming interests perfectly. If you haven't heard of this game like I had, it's an indie game released a few years ago that is an action rhythm game hybrid. You move around and fight enemies with various attacks and combos, but the game is built around boss stages where enemies and the boss's attacks are timed to the music. The game is quite short, but you are encouraged to replay boss stages with remixed music to try to improve your score. The thing that holds back this game from being a true favorite of mine is the fact that following the rhythm is more of a suggestion than a requirement. For most of the game, I played it like a regular action game without following the rhythm much, and I was able to beat every level pretty easily. You can replay the levels with more demanding difficulty, but I never felt invested enough to replay any level more than twice. The story was cute as well. The characters gave off a Psychonauts kind of energy, which I enjoyed. I really enjoyed getting to experience this game I had never heard of before, but the short length and underwhelming rhythm mechanics means I won't remember this game as fondly as I wish I did. I'd love to see a sequel one day. I think the idea is great, and some improvements to the formula could end up making a truly memorable game. If anything, Hi-Fi Rush has shown that the future for action rhythm game hybrids is bright. It took me some time to get around to playing Sonic Frontiers, as I really didn't think it would be a game that I would enjoy. From the trailers, it looked like a cheap attempt to copy the success of popular open-world games, and unfortunately Sonic Team hadn't had the best track record as of late. But the hype for the game on the internet ended up convincing me to give it a try for myself, and after I did, I ended up loving Sonic Frontiers. Yeah, it all really worked for me. I think Sonic Team made both a really enjoyable open-world game and a really enjoyable Sonic game. For one, the idea of having a character move around an open-world setting at super speed is really, really fun. No time is wasted having to walk somewhere. If you want to go somewhere, you can get there really easily. This helps cut down on the length of the game, which is a really good thing, because it's really easy to get fatigued by open-world games that take like 100 hours to beat. I beat the main story in about 15-20 hours, but I feel like I got to see so much of the game's world in that time. Then, when you explore and find entrances to the game's cyberspace levels, you're treated to some of the best 3D levels Sonic has ever had. The idea of shorter levels that you're encouraged to replay for faster times feels like it's the way Sonic always should have been, but the non-linear approach gives more reason to replay the level rather than just moving on to the next one. The game certainly has some bad cyberspace levels, but most of them are really good, and create a good sense of speed. Finally, I have to mention how the game excels in its boss fights and the use of Superstar. You don't get many boss fights, but they truly are the highlight of the game, with exciting new vocal themes and final boss level spectacle for each one. It was a good decision to use Supersonic for these, as I don't think the form gets enough use in other games, and it was really fun to have access to it multiple times. I have a lot of praise to give to Sonic Frontiers, but I do still have to note that it's a heavily flawed game. The performance is middling, collectibles are kind of pointless past a certain point, and Sonic is still a bit too hard to control at times. But the sheer amount of fun I had playing this one means I can overlook that kind of stuff a lot more than I usually do. Now we move on to a game that I certainly will not have as much to say about as I did for Sonic Frontiers, but I do have some potentially unpopular opinions. I played this game on a whim since I really felt like playing a traditional rhythm game and had been sitting downloaded on my PlayStation for a while. I knew people had praised this one a lot more than the other Persona's dancing games, mostly for the story mode that it had. I gotta say, I ended up being a bit underwhelmed by all of it. It's definitely a good thing that the game has a story mode, but I was never really hooked by it. It was a bit disjointed and boring at times, and the fact that you were limited to the easier difficulties for story mode felt like it was something I just had to do to unlock the main game, aka playing the levels on the hardest difficulty. I do really like the Persona dancing games. The levels are always fun, but the song list felt a little uninteresting, as many of the songs were used twice or even 3 times. I liked the optional social link events in the Persona 3 and 5 dancing games more, as they were unlocked by playing songs and I could look at them whenever. So yeah, I do prefer the dancing games for 3 and 5, but the core gameplay still makes the game overall enjoyable. That being said, the intro song for the game is definitely one of the best Persona songs ever made, so I have to give the game extra credit based on that alone. I grew up playing Return to Dreamland on the Wii, so this was not my first time playing the game, but I was very pleased at how well it held up when I played it on my Switch this year. The visuals look lovely, and the main game was kept entirely intact as far as I could tell, so it's just as fun as it was back in the Wii days. The levels are well designed, and the ultra abilities that serve as the game's gimmick create a satisfying feeling of power. The pattern of Nintendo adding new side stories to their Switch ports continues with this game, as there is now a new game mode where you can play as a side character Magolor. It doesn't take very long to beat, but it is a really fun new addition and serves as a great cherry on top of what I think is already a very worthy port. There was a lot of new minigames added as well. I never actually got to try any of them with friends, but they all seemed fun when I looked at them. I did try the 100-player Samurai game, where you can essentially do a quick draw minigame every day and compete against other players' online times, which is a very simple yet still engaging idea. Great port of a great game. I was very happy to replay it, though I'm still getting used to the new take on DDD's design they use in this game. This game was something entirely new for me, as I had never played a Remedy Entertainment game before. I'm really glad I played one of their games this year though, since there was so much buzz around Alan Wake 2 during the Game Awards season. Alan Wake seemed like it might be a bit too horror-y for my taste, but by playing Control, I was able to get a good sense of what makes a Remedy game special and why people love their games so much. They approach game design in a unique way, with a heavy emphasis on live-action shots mixed in with CGI, with a sprinkling of quirky scenes in an otherwise serious game. The game is creepy, but not scary if you know what I mean, so there wasn't anything non-horror fans like myself couldn't handle. The gameplay was simple yet enjoyable, and I liked the focus on telekinetic powers over just shooting with a gun. The story lost me a bit near the end. I even tried looking up the plot online, but things got a little bit confusing as the game reached its climax, and I'm still unsure exactly what happened to this day. It's a pretty short game, and unlike anything else I'd played, so if you're looking to try a game from that studio, Control has a strong recommendation from me. The storyline of Xenoblade fans getting absolutely spoiled with so many good things was one of my favorite things to happen last year, but we had one final hurrah this year with the release of Future Redeemed. Monolith Soft essentially continues their trend of giving us a whole new freaking game through DLC, and I think Future Redeemed is more impressive than Torna ever was. I gotta start by saying, this is the most fun Xenoblade gameplay has ever been. It's big enough to feel expansive, but still small enough that doing everything feels totally possible. And they even make the process super fun and enjoyable through the addition of Affinity Goals, which gives you points to spend on upgrading your characters that you earn through doing almost anything in the game. Battles, you get points. Side quests, you get points. Walking around and exploring, you most certainly get points. I was also very happy to see the Collectopedia back, as it was one of the features I missed most in Xenoblade 2 and 3. So yeah, the gameplay is phenomenal, and the story is too. It feels like more of a continuation of Xenoblade 3's story than some fan service-filled chapter to tie the whole series together, but given the fact that it's DLC for 3, that certainly makes sense. As I was getting excited for the DLC to drop, I did fall into the same pitfall I fell into with Xenoblade 3, where I got a little too attached to the idea of the story being super fan-servicey with all the characters from previous games coming back, but that's not exactly what we got. The past games are still seen as distant echoes from the past and are lightly mentioned sometimes. Hard to fault the DLC for not delivering on that expectation though. There was one bananas moment at the end of the story that had my jaw on the floor more than any other gaming moment this year, so the story certainly delivered in that aspect. Anyways, yet another absolute banger from Monolith Soft. I'm starting to get convinced they're incapable of making a bad game or DLC expansion. Can't wait to see what they do next. If you didn't already know, I'm a massive Legend of Zelda fan, so in theory, the release of this game back in 2019 should have been super exciting for me. Well, not quite, as I had played the Crypt of the Necrodancer in the past and was not really a huge fan of it. I found the roguelike elements to be frustrating and the rhythm gameplay to get stale somewhat fast. So even though the idea of an indie-developed Zelda rhythm game really excited me, the ties back to Crypt of the Necrodancer put me off to the point I decided to pass on it and check out the game later. Well, 4 years have passed since then, and somehow, I finally decided to buy the game when it was on sale this year. And yeah, I'm kinda glad I didn't pay full price for this. I totally have to compliment both the pixel art and the music. The game both looks and sounds gorgeous. You can tell the team making it put a lot of passion into it, and they clearly had the love for the Zelda franchise. But, man, I just can't get behind this gameplay. Since I'm not a huge fan of the move to the beat thing, what I'm left with is just a subpar Zelda game. The dungeons really didn't stick out in my head much, and some of the enemies were frustrating to fight. If you're cool with the way Necrodancer plays, then you'll probably love this game, as I do think it's better than the game that inspired it. I just don't think this one is for me though. Hopefully we can get a traditional Zelda rhythm game someday. Sigh, if only there was another Zelda game for me to play in May. This is it. This is the game. This is the game that sucked me in and made me fall in love with it more than anything else I played this year. The game is absolutely phenomenal. It's creative, addicting, polished, and most of all, fun. I love Breath of the Wild as much as everyone else does, but it was missing some of that stuff that made Zelda feel like Zelda, you know? Tears of the Kingdom doesn't do everything it could, but the improvements made for a game that I enjoyed so much more. It was one of the only times in my life that I cleared out an afternoon and just played the game for hours on launch day, and I still didn't want to put it down. The game makes a great first impression at the start. I appreciate the semi-linear path you are presented with an emphasis on getting you invested in the story right away. Even within that linear path you can take on the Great Sky Island you start on, you can also completely disregard that and make your own path, which is the best way I think it could be done. Okay, I gotta be careful not to make a 30-minute rant on everything I love about this game, so let me just highlight the basics of what I love. The addition of vehicles make getting around the game's world so much less boring since you can move way faster than before. There are also way more worthwhile things to collect, as opposed to Breath of the Wild, where it felt like Korok seeds and outfits were the only major things to collect. The shrines feel like less puzzles and more like the Zelda team showing off all the cool stuff they put in the game, which isn't necessarily better than just having puzzles, but I certainly don't mind the change. Returning to the same world we spent so much time in Breath of the Wild worked to this game's advantage in some ways, as it was less about discovering what the world looks like and more about the curiosity to see what has changed. I've been a bit disappointed to see that public opinion has somewhat soured on this game since release, with a vocal minority highlighting the flaws that this game has. If you heard someone complain about the game on YouTube, you probably know what I'm talking about. I just don't think any of these flaws come close to tarnishing what I think is a truly incredible game. It is impressive that I can love this game and still acknowledge that it could be better in many aspects. It makes me excited for what the future holds, both for The Legend of Zelda and the gaming world as a whole. It was so cool to find out that this game was getting re-released this year, as it had been a game I had wanted to play for a long time. The game was made by the same guy who directed the Ace Attorney series, and fans of the series have been singing the praises of this game for years. And yeah, it was a lovely game to play. Unlike the Ace Attorney games, this one was super short. I beat it in like a week, and that means that the game's pacing is really tight and never gets boring. The setup of the story is super interesting, and I guarantee you will never be able to guess where the plot ends up. Not quite sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Everyone who has been saying that Missile the Pomeranian is the best dog in video games was totally right. I love that character so much. The gameplay was not as strong as the story, unfortunately, as you spend the whole game as a spirit moving from object to object and causing various actions to happen. There's nothing wrong or unfun about this idea, but it's quite simple and some of the puzzles were a bit frustrating. The idea still leads to many funny and wacky interactions, so there's still a lot of fun to be had here. If you want to try one of these visual novel-esque games, but the length of some of them is too daunting, I highly recommend giving this one a try if you want to play something a little shorter. Considering Harry Potter was about 50% of my personality when I was a kid, there was no way I wasn't going to try Hogwarts Legacy this year, especially considering it actually seemed to be good, as I was not certain that it would be when we first heard about it. Overall, I have to say that I'm quite impressed with this game, and there's so many parts that made me feel like a Harry Potter loving kid again. The story impressed me quite a lot, and some of the character-focused side quests I found were super engaging and well written. Gameplay was also a highlight for me, because the spell combat works quite well, despite seeming simple at first. The way people use shields make you use spells other than just the one that does the most damage, and encourage you to be creative with how you fight enemies. The thing that excites me most about this game is actually the potential for the future. Much like other games I've played, it is still flawed in several areas, but I think a potential sequel where some of this stuff is improved upon could be a truly incredible game. For example, despite being called Hogwarts Legacy, you barely spend any time in Hogwarts, as the developers made a large open world area around Hogwarts, and past a certain point, all your story quests take place outside of the school. I did enjoy all the parts that took place in the open world, but the part that really captured my attention was whenever the game wasn't Hogwarts, as the school is really well designed and full of secrets. I don't think this game will leave as strong of an impact on you if you're not a Harry Potter fan, but if you are, I think you'll have a great time with this game. After this game received a large amount of praise last year, I finally decided to give this game a try once I finished Hogwarts Legacy. I never bought it last year because I heard it was one of those super short games that focuses on its narrative over gameplay, and I find those games to be a bit disappointing sometimes. I ended up liking Stray as much as I thought I would. I liked it, but I don't think it will end up leaving any sort of lasting impression on me. I've already kind of forgotten the story, though I don't think there was much of it in the first place. The game seems more focused with creating an immersive world and doing really cute stuff with a cat character. And I'd say the game accomplishes this quite well. The world is stunning and extremely interesting, and all the cute little details they add to the game really make you feel like a cat. That being said, I think the idea of playing as a real cat in a video game could have been expanded so much further, as the player is only required to do simple puzzle solving and sequences that barely classify as platforming, since you automatically jump to wherever you're supposed to go. Complaints aside, I do really love the world that the game created. I just wish I got to spend a bit more time on it with gameplay that was a bit deeper. This was another game that had been on my backlog for a while that I finally got around to playing this year. With the release of Spider-Man 2 imminent, and the plot of Miles Morales seemingly being important to that game's story as well, I knew it was finally time to play this game. I'm very happy that we are seeing so much of the Miles Morales character in media these days. I found that he's a bit more interesting than Peter Parker, and the way he's written in this game really highlighted that for me. Much like the original Spider-Man PS4, the game is super fun based on the Spider-Man gameplay alone, and there's certainly no arguing with that. Playing as Miles Morales also helped to spice the game up, as his combat moveset is more interesting than Peter's. I'm excited to use some of these moves in the larger context of the sequel when I get to playing it next year. I did always think it was strange to release Miles Morales as a standalone game though, and finishing it didn't really clear up this thought either. As I've said, the game is still super fun and it feels different enough, but it still feels like it would have been better suited as a DLC rather than a standalone release. This was another game that released last year that I didn't get around to playing until this year. I was excited for it, but given the fact that the previous game goes on sale in the eShop constantly, I knew I could get a good deal if I waited a while. Sure enough, before long I was able to find this game for $20. Anyways, in regard to the game itself, I think it serves as a great sequel to the original Mario & Rabbids, which I believe to still be an underrated gem on Switch. It feels like somewhat of a strange sequel though, as there's a lot that's changed from the original. The game has minor changes like the addition of voice acting, but there's also some pretty major changes to the exploration gameplay and the battle system. The battles only kind of feel like the ones from the original game, as the movement and character abilities are way different from how they were. And of course, the biggest difference is the addition of the sparks. These little creatures determine what abilities each character can use in battle. They're fun to collect and upgrade, but their existence leaves some characters feeling a little underwhelming, as the abilities they had in the first game can be equipped by anyone now. All these changes work really well, and the game is quite polished, yet there's a special something the first game had that this one doesn't, and I can't quite describe it. It's hard to look too far into that since I can't even define a specific criticism, so overall I have to say the game really is a treat. Fans who loved the first one should certainly play this one, and I could even recommend it to people who haven't played the original. A light, fun game you can easily beat in 30 hours, made by a team with a clear passion for their craft, and I can't wait to see what they do next. This is easily the best hidden gem game I've played all year, as I haven't heard anyone talk about this game. I saw it in a Nintendo Indie presentation and thought it looked interesting, but I didn't get a chance to play it until this year. I had my expectations set a bit low since great indie games usually get big spotlights, but I was actually really impressed with everything the game did. The art style might not be unique, as some could liken it to games like Ori and the Blind Forest, but I still think it looks beautiful. The gameplay is where the game totally shines. It's somewhat of a puzzle platforming game where you have to clear short levels that involve activating different types of gems with a variety of effects. The game has 9 or so worlds, and each one centers around a different type of gem, so the level design never gets stale. I was actually really impressed by how creative the different gem effects were. Opening a new world always made me excited to see what new power I could use next. The game is more focused on making you think rather than testing your skill, so often you have to repeat the same level multiple times to figure out how to beat it. Nothing was too obtuse though, as I was always able to figure things out after a couple tries. The story is the only place the game falters somewhat. There's a grand story the game is trying to tell, but since most of it is told through pictures at the end of levels, I think I kinda missed the point a little bit, and was a little lost when it wrapped up at the end. That aside, the game is still worth it for the fun puzzle gameplay alone. Give the game a shot if you want to try a new under-the-radar indie game. I was certainly glad I did. Tears of the Kingdom really reignited my passion for Zelda, so I chose to go back and revisit a game I was initially uninterested in upon its release, that being Skyward Sword HD. Skyward Sword is a 3D Zelda I haven't played in the longest time, as even though I remember enjoying it as a kid, it never felt like something I wanted to play again. But I'm very glad I ended up playing it again and with a new mindset, as I think I enjoyed it way more now that I'm older. A lot of this probably has to do with the changes made in the HD version. I greatly appreciate the ways the game lets you move along faster with less interruptions. The new button controls weren't too much of a game changer for me, as I still found myself wanting to use the motion controls, but I'm very glad they've been added as an option. It makes the game feel more like a capital V video game rather than just one of those Wii motion control games. Because most of what the original game offered is really stellar. The music, the story, the world, and many other aspects are some of the best in any Zelda game, period. The game is certainly held back by a large amount of backtracking in the same areas, which is probably a red flag to a lot of people, but I actually didn't mind it too much. It just goes to show there really isn't a 3D Zelda game that isn't a contender for the list of the greatest games of all time, and the new version of Skyward Sword reminded me that this game certainly deserves that level of acclaim as well. Over the summer, I decided to wipe the thick layer of dust off my Steam application in an attempt to beat one of the many Steam games I bought on sale and never played. The game I chose to rescue from the fate of never getting played was The Talos Principle, a game I always thought looked interesting, but seemed too long to be worth my time. Ultimately, I'm quite impressed by this game, especially given the fact that it's almost 10 years old now. The game is constantly trying to make you think, either through one of its tricky puzzles or through a deep philosophical question that the game throws at you during a chat session. The game only used a very limited amount of gameplay elements within the puzzles, so everything is simple on the surface, but super complicated once you get in the meat of each puzzle room. The puzzles are incredibly well designed, but sometimes they can be designed a little too well, to the point where I would get completely stumped. The hint system that's in the game is extremely limited and rarely helpful, so I ended up having to look up solutions online multiple times. I can't say I'm a big fan of puzzle games that get so complex that it's too hard to figure out within the game itself, but every time I saw what the solution is, I always had a great amount of respect for how it was made. If you like puzzles, you get a lot of them in Talos Principle, but be prepared to get stumped a lot if you aren't a puzzle game genius. To be honest, I wanted to love Pikmin 4 more than I did. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it, but I was really hoping I would love it. Of all the Nintendo franchises, Pikmin is one of the only ones that I'm not super invested in, but Pikmin 4 seemed like the change the series needed to get me super involved. And to an extent it was, since I felt motivated to finish the game. The little open worlds are interesting and fun to explore, with the one set in the house being a definite standout to me. Caves make a return from Pikmin 2, which is a very good choice since they overall improve the variety of content in the game, but I did enjoy them less than exploring the main world. The vibes alone make the game stand out, as riding on top of the dog Ochi with all your Pikmin never failed to make me smile. When it comes down to it though, the game was just a bit too easy for my taste. Most of the enemies barely put up a fight, and almost anything can be defeated instantly by rushing them with all your Pikmin. The night missions were a bit of a letdown too, as I never sweated during any of them, and I'm pretty sure I did them all. I know how much some people out there love this series, and I'm certain that those people are utterly satisfied with Pikmin 4, as I do think it's easily the best Pikmin game thus far, but I think Pikmin just might not be a series I'm super into. I'm still glad I played the game, it was a lovely experience. It was worth playing just for that big house level alone, I'd say. And just like that, Sonic Frontiers is back for more. I was super excited for this DLC, as I found the ending sequence of Sonic Frontiers was a bit of a letdown, and I knew that this DLC could be an End of Evangelion style redo of that ending. To my knowledge, the consensus on whether the DLC is good or not is a bit split, and I can see why, but overall I was very satisfied with everything the DLC added to the game, especially considering it was all free. The main point of attraction is the 3 new characters you can play as, which was a big deal since it's been ages since Tails, Knuckles, and Amy have been playable in a 3D game. The new characters have all sorts of platforming challenges sprinkled throughout the world that give you collectibles, and I found them to be a lot of fun. It's not too often we get 3D platforming these days, so it was a big highlight for me. The characters themselves are part of the reason why people are torn on this new content, as some of them control quite strangely and make the platforming segments a bit too janky. Heck, there's even an upgrade for Tails that literally just lets you fly around, and this allows you to skip entire challenges. Now, I didn't mind this, as I thought it was kind of fun to fly around and skip stuff, but it seems like more of an oversight than anything. Then there's the other part that people complain about, the parts where you play as Sonic. 2 things about these sections can be infuriating: the extremely punishing tower climbs and the combat trials. The tower climbs are so frustrating because they ask you to do platforming that requires some level of precision, but every time you fall, you have to redo the tower all over again, and there are no checkpoints. I kinda like the challenge in a way, since I did feel like I was improving, and I was able to beat them all eventually. Then there's the combat trials, which, simply put, are just way too hard for a game that was otherwise easy. Switching to an easy difficulty made a lot of these challenges doable for me, but it just did not feel balanced otherwise. A lot of these frustrating aspects were patched out recently, though I do think it might be a bit too little too late. It is really awesome that we got all of this for free, but if making it paid would have resulted in a more polished product at launch, I happily would have paid for it. Much like the Sonic Frontiers main game, I walk away feeling quite positive about this new content, since despite the fact it's incredibly unpolished, I still had a lot of fun, and that really speaks to me with this game as a whole. The new ending and final boss is great too. It makes all the frustrating parts worth it in the end. Finishing this game was a journey almost 8 years in the making, as I started and stopped multiple playthroughs of this game dating all the way back to Cloud's reveal in Smash. I kept starting new playthroughs of the game, then getting a bit bored and dropping it for something else. This year, I decided the time was right to return to this game once more, since knowledge of the original game will most likely help enhance my experience in FF7 Rebirth, which I will certainly be playing. FF7 is one of those games that I think would have been a much more pleasant experience if I played it in the context of the time when it was released, as I think many aspects of the game have not aged well with time. Many of the menus are tedious to navigate through, and I don't think the art style has aged that well. I greatly enjoyed having the use of a 3x speed feature they added in modern ports of the game, as everything moves kinda slowly, both in battle and in cutscenes. Those are a lot of the things that caused me to walk away from the game multiple times, but the interest in the story and the world I gained from getting further in the game helped feed my interest more and more toward the end. The story and the characters are quite interesting, and I really do see why this game helped so many people fall in love with RPGs. But for me personally, I think it's for the best that this game is getting an expansive remake, as it lets the great characters, world, and story shine in a game that isn't held back by poorly aged game design. I respect the hell out of everything this game did for RPGs, but the game itself was a bit too uneven for me to truly love it. I wasn't even aware that Sonic Colors had a DS port until about a year ago, and I was intrigued when I learned that it was a 2D platformer that was completely different from the Sonic Colors we all know. Then, a few months ago, I found a physical copy of the game for only $5 at a gaming expo, so I knew I had to give the game a try. One of the things I've learned in my time playing Sonic games this year is that Sonic games are way more fun when you have access to a boost button. Sonic Colors DS maintains the fun amusement park setting from the main game and creates really fun 2D levels that take advantage of Sonic's speed really well. The Wisps have a big focus here too, and I actually think they complement the design of 2D Sonic quite well, since they give you more ways to reach the higher levels, which tends to be where you want to be in a level. The game has some fun side missions to mix up the gameplay, and cute dialogue scenes with Sonic's friends to go with them. For a game I hadn't heard about until recently, I'm incredibly surprised that this might be one of my new favorite 2D Sonic games. That's not saying too much, since I'm not too big of a fan of 2D Sonic, but there's no question I got my money's worth with this one. This game was a huge treat for fans of the Danganronpa series, and I thought the game turned out really, really good. The story had me hooked all the way through. I never wanted to put the game down. The biggest strength of the game is the world it creates. The Danganronpa games always felt a bit too small for their own good, but Raincode excels in this area by making a whole city that is easy to get invested in. My only complaint is that the gameplay can be a bit lacking, which isn't surprising given the fact that Danganronpa always had very simple gameplay, but Raincode presents new ideas that seem like they could be something more in-depth with a bit more effort. I'm going to keep my thoughts on this game brief because I'm actually writing a whole video about this game, so stay tuned for that. All I'll say right now is that it massively surpassed my expectations, and I thought it was a riveting experience. I highly recommend it. Some of my favorite gaming memories from this year are the days I would play Raincode and then finish the evening with some time in Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I had the pleasure of playing these two games simultaneously, and I ended up enjoying both of them so much. They provide a nice contrast to each other, and strangely enough, they've become kind of intertwined in my head. That feeling aside, Mario Wonder is really that good. I think it's the best 2D Mario game by a country mile. I've never really loved a 2D Mario game before, as the 3D games were always my favorite. The game is stuffed full of fun ideas, which means nothing ever really gets old. I've never seen a game get this creative before. It really is quite impressive. Wonder Flowers are a perfect fit for the traditional Mario level structure, and I really hope we get a whole slew of Mario spin-offs based on the Wonder Flower gimmick. Mario Kart Wonder, Mario Party Wonder, Mario and Sonic at the Wonder Olympics, I want it all. The game does get quite easy, probably the only complaint I could give to the game, but the amount of joy and fun there is to be had make that part not matter so much. Besides, the harder levels in the Special World scratch that difficulty itch. They are hard, but not too hard that they get frustrating. The game also features a selection of shorter levels to complement the main levels, which I really enjoyed. It felt straight out of Mario 3D World, which is a good thing since I love that game. If this is the last big Mario game on Switch, I think this is a great way to cap off an excellent catalog of Mario games on this console. Releasing right next to Mario Wonder was probably the worst thing that could have happened to this game, as I had to face the massive downgrade in quality when playing this right after Mario. The game isn't that bad, it's just not that good either. The whole thing feels very safe. Not quite as safe as reusing a bunch of fan-favorite zones, but the game feels a little too similar to the games people loved on Genesis. The game does bring two new ideas to the table, one of which works and one that doesn't. The one that does work is the new Chaos Emerald powers. It's easy to forget to use them, but I do think they help to make the game more fun. Then there's the thing that doesn't work, and unfortunately that's the multiplayer mode. Sonic just isn't made for multiplayer unless each player has their own screen. Other players constantly get left behind, which just sucks all the fun out of playing together. The levels themselves are rather fun, some of the better levels in the 2D series, but the bosses are extremely hit or miss. I've heard complaints about how unfair the true final boss is. I never got to that boss, but I did find the regular final boss to be quite cheap with an insta-death section at the end. I do appreciate the effort from Sonic Team to pump some life into the 2D series with a new entry, but ironically enough, I think Sonic needs to look at what 2D Mario is doing if they want to make 2D Sonic thrive again. And, maybe space out your release a bit better next time. I've been a big fan of the Shantae series ever since playing Pirate's Curse back on my Wii U. I played the games that have come out since, but I've never gone back and played the one that predated Pirate's Curse. I finally got around to playing Risky's Revenge this year, and even though I did enjoy my time with it, it does feel like the weakest of the Shantae games. The pixel art is a bit lacking, which is understandable given the fact that it was made for the DS, but it does feature well-made portraits for each character, much like the other Shantae games. The dialogue is a strong point, since these characters have just as much personality as they do in future games, and a couple things happen in the plot that explain things from Pirate's Curse, which I enjoyed seeing. The gameplay is mostly the same as the other games, which is great because I love those other games. It's really fun. The map is quite tiny though, which leaves little room for hidden collectibles, which is a bit of a shame. The dungeons do feel quite large and impressive in contrast, so I'm glad they put a lot of effort into those. Risky's Revenge is a short, sweet game that feels like a bite-sized version of the Shantae experience. If you want to see what Shantae is all about in a cheaper, quicker game, then you should definitely give Risky's Revenge a shot. Otherwise, I do recommend playing Pirate's Curse since it is a better game. I must say, I did not expect much going into this game. I'm a big fan of WarioWare's smooth moves on the Wii, which gave me the motivation to try this game in the first place, but I still wasn't expecting to like it more than the other WarioWare on Switch. Move It brought me back to the days of playing crappy Wii motion control minigames, though I think the games Move It brings to the table are actually quite fun. The game is still very simple and vastly overpriced, especially given the fact that I can beat it in 4 hours, but the time I spent with it did put a smile on my face. The various micro games and the poses you do in them are very intuitive and fun for the most part, and the game really felt well designed. The multiplayer mode also saw a big step up compared to the one in Smooth Moves. I spent an hour or so playing with friends, and I had a good time in that mode as well. I don't know if there will continue to be a space for WarioWare, as the expectations for AAA games get larger and larger, as its design philosophy is literally to be as quick as possible, but for what matters, I had a really good time with this game. I was reminded of Rhythm Heaven multiple times while playing this game, which makes sense considering the two series are made by the same developers, but now I'm left craving a new Rhythm Heaven more than I was before. I really hope we see a new one soon. It's been far too long. I've had my eye on this game ever since it was announced, and I'm really glad that I finally got around to playing it this year. It's a stylish katana-wielding action game where you get the ability to slow down time in order to do really cool action stuff. The thing that stood out to me most about this game was just how violent and disturbing it managed to be, even while using a pixel art style. I knew it took inspiration from Hotline Miami, but I still didn't expect some of the scenes to freak me out like they did. The story, which is one of the game's biggest strengths, has a couple of really strong scenes that get you really invested. The action is great too, but the levels do get a bit samey by the time you reach the end. The levels don't really have any gimmicks outside of the location they're in, so there's not too much to spice things up as you get toward the end of the game. The game was going really well, and then I realized that it ends abruptly with the promise of a DLC update to finish the game's story. This left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, because it's been almost 5 years since the launch of the game and there's still no DLC. Real bummer there, but what the game does offer is easily worth your time. Great story, great music, great action. Here's hoping the game gets an update soon. I'm officially interested in seeing how it ends. I didn't realize until I wrote this script just how many Sonic games I played this year. Like, I didn't even consider myself that big of a Sonic fan, but this is like the 6th time he's shown up in this video. Anyways, it was a pleasant surprise to see that there was a new Sonic game coming exclusively to Apple devices, as it was a rare chance to flex my Apple computer with my friends who just have PCs. Oh, and also the fact that the game looked pretty good. So yeah, I got to play the game right when it came out, and I was certainly happy with what we ended up getting here. You gotta temper your expectations when you see something that's ultimately a mobile game, since a game like this doesn't quite hold up to what I would expect if it was a console release. I've heard some people talk about this game like it was the best Sonic game in a long time, and I can see why people would say that, but I didn't think it was that good. Lots of fun and easy 3D platforming levels with a wide variety of mission objectives. The addition of other playable characters is a great treat, and they all control quite well. It's a pity that each character doesn't have a unique moveset, but I'm glad they're here nonetheless. I do hope we see a larger budget version of this game in the future. I like what it brings to the table, but I think being a mobile game holds it back a bit too much. With a longer length, more complex mechanics, and of course a wider release, I think Sonic Team could have an even bigger hit on their hands. And here we are, the final game that I beat this year. Well, beat is a bit of a simplification. You can't really beat Stardew Valley, but I recently progressed to a point where I felt satisfied walking away. I've heard the great praises of Stardew Valley for many years now, and I'd always been curious, but I'd never actually tried playing it until this year. And yeah, I certainly see what all the hype is about. The game is addicting and super well designed, especially when you consider that it was mostly made by one person. If you can't tell by the other games I've played this year, I greatly prefer faster paced games that are a bit more action-packed. Usually games like Stardew Valley lose me pretty quickly, so it's a testament to how good this game is that I was able to get 75 hours of enjoyment out of it. That being said, I did start to get pretty bored near the end, most likely because I don't really enjoy the mindset that these games encourage. For one, winters in this game got a bit dull due to the fact that you can't really grow crops, so I found that I had way less to do during that season. I had a general list of things I wanted to do, but I often felt like those things required a lot of waiting, and since I never needed to make money that badly, I felt like I did a lot of passively waiting for things to happen, which I got a bit annoyed with. One of the most enjoyable aspects of playing Stardew was talking with other people who had also played the game, and comparing what we each got up to on our farms. I found that I rushed through the game's main content a lot faster than other people I talked to, which probably explains why I got kinda bored. Anyways, my complaints aside, the game is certainly incredible, and there's so much different stuff you can do, especially if you don't rush through them all too much. The game seems like the true pinnacle of farming games, at least from my minimal knowledge. I'm certainly glad to be done with the game so I can move on to new things, but I must say I enjoyed my time with it. Maybe I don't dislike this genre of game as much as I thought I did. Phew! And just like that, we've completed a recap of my 2023 gaming journey. It was an honor to be able to share my various thoughts like this, and even if you didn't watch all of it, I hope you're able to enjoy hearing me talk about at least one of these games. Since we're at the end here, I figured I'd end off with a top 3 from the year so I can highlight my favorites one more time. So, without further ado, my number 3 for the year has to go to Sonic Frontiers. It might have been a game with many flaws, but it's one of the games I had the most pure fun with the entire year. I've also been listening to the game's soundtrack a lot, so the thoughts of the game have stayed in my brain throughout the whole year. Between the main game and the DLC, this was easily the game I talked about most, so I hope I adequately conveyed my passion for it. Moving on to the next game, coming at number 2, we have Master Detective Archives Raincode. I know I didn't get to talk about this game too much since I'm saving my thoughts for a future video, but the story and characters in this one really left an impact on me. I felt like I couldn't put the game down while I was playing it, and that speaks volumes to my enjoyment. Then, to the surprise of no one who watched me talk about it, we have my number 1 favorite game I played this year, Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Despite the fact that some people soured on it since it released, I still think this game is the pinnacle of game design, and not just the open world genre, but for gaming as a whole. This was easily the most addicted I was to a game all year. Every hour I spent in the game just flew by. It deserves every bit of praise that it's gotten, and I'm so happy that the Zelda series received yet another stellar entry. There's my top 3 of the year. I'm pretty confident in placing those 3 above the others, but there were so many other incredible games I played this year as well. I was so glad to have been able to experience so many cool adventures, and it was a pleasure to relive them all through the creation of this video. With that, I believe it's time to wrap this long video up. I would love to receive any feedback or impressions down in the comments, whether you want to comment on one of your favorite games that I played this year, or if you just want to tell me whether you enjoyed the video or not. I'd be happy to make this a yearly tradition, as I had a blast making this video, but I'd certainly love to hear any feedback on the style of the video and if you'd like to see it again for next year. Some of the big games I plan on playing next year are Yakuza 0, Final Fantasy XVI, Witcher 3, Spider-Man 2, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm very excited to check all those out. I hope to see you again next year when I talk about those in some way, and if not, I hope you return for whatever other crazy video I cook up next. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great 2024.